So both the Matrix and the metaverse are or closely involve virtual worlds. The Matrix is one giant virtual world, immersive, interactive, computer generated. So is Stevenson's metaverse. And Zuckerberg's metaverse is perhaps best seen as a system of interconnected virtual worlds. So I'm going to try to think philosophically about virtual worlds and virtual reality. I think of this as a philosophical inquiry into the status of virtual reality, starting with some very abstract philosophical questions, but gradually bringing it home to some more practical questions at the same time. I think of this, what I'm doing here is what I like to call techno-philosophy. The idea behind techno-philosophy is a two-way interaction between philosophy and technology. On the one hand, using philosophy to shed light on technology, thinking philosophically about technologies such as virtual reality technology. In principle, you can do this with all kinds of technology, smartphones, the internet, AI, but here, virtual reality, but also using technology to shed light on philosophy. I think that thinking about technology can very often provide input to make progress on very traditional philosophical problems, the mind-body problem. How do you know anything about the external world? Is there a God? The nature of value, what's a good life? I believe that thinking hard about virtual reality in particular can shed light on some of those questions. So today, I want to do a little bit of techno-philosophy. So my central thesis when it comes to virtual reality and virtual worlds is that virtual reality is genuine reality. There's a long tradition of thinking of virtual reality as some kind of fake reality. It's an illusion. It's a fiction. It's mere escapism. What goes on there isn't real. This sometimes gets encoded into expressions people use like IRL, in real life. There's VR and there's real life or the real world. I want to say that in a certain sense, that's a mistaken way of thinking. Virtual reality is genuine reality. It's different from physical reality, probably different from physical reality, but nonetheless, a first-class reality in its own right. That thesis breaks down into at least three separate theses. The first is that virtual reality is not an illusion or a fiction. Objects in VR are real objects. Events in VR really happen. They needn't be illusory or fictional at all. Objects in virtual reality may be digital objects, but they're still perfectly real for all that. Second, we can lead a meaningful life in virtual reality. In principle, people may well end up spending more and more of their lives in VR, perhaps working, perhaps building relationships, and so on. It'll be very limited at first, but as the technology progresses, it will expand. Some people are going to say that's only ever going to be escapism. I think that in principle, one can lead as meaningful a life in VR as in physical reality. There are upsides and downsides for both, but it's at least will be rational for some people to lead their lives in VR eventually. Third, this now connects to the simulation idea. We might actually be in a virtual reality already. It's not part of my thesis to say we are actually in a simulation. I don't say that, but it is a prospect I take seriously, and I do think it's one that we can't rule out. We can't know that we're not in a simulation. And so in a certain sense, I want to say that just as virtual reality is genuine reality, I want to say physical reality may well itself be a form of virtual reality, whether it's a simulation or even in other ideas suggested by contemporary physics. Physical reality itself may have elements of virtual reality. So those are my three central theses. And so for this first part, the topic is the simulation hypothesis, the extreme case of a matrix-like virtual world. Could we be living ourselves in a computer simulation? The so-called simulation hypothesis says we are ourselves in a lifelong computer simulation. And you might say, well, why should we believe that? Okay, here's a picture of a computer simulation. This is the matrix, which also shows two ways of being in a simulation. This is Trinity and the Oracle talking to each other. I think this was in one of the sequels. It turns out that actually the Oracle is herself a simulated creature. She's one of the machines. So she is herself generated as part of the simulation. That's what I call a pure sim, a pure simulated creature. Whereas Trinity jacks in to the matrix, but she still has a biological brain and body, and her brain connects to the matrix. That's what I call a biosim, a biological being connecting to the matrix. So here are two different ways that we could be in a simulation: biological beings connecting to a simulation, or purely digital beings. For present purposes, we don't have to choose one of these over the other. They're both versions of the simulation hypothesis. Then the question arises, once we start talking about, it looks like there are going to be universe simulations like this eventually. Simulation technology is getting better and better. Eventually, they may be indistinguishable from the physical world, which raises the question, the philosophical question about knowledge. How do you know you're not in a simulation right now? And it looks like it's hard to see how you can have any conclusive evidence that you're not in a simulation. Maybe you think, I don't know, maybe you think your cat is so delightfully playful that could never be simulated, or this beautiful forest could never be simulated, or these other people could never be simulated. But it just looks like for any evidence you might have that you're not in a simulation, that evidence could in principle be simulated. So a simulation could just build that in. It would be indistinguishable. So it's hard to see how you could ever conclusively demonstrate that you're not in a simulation. This idea goes back in so many philosophical traditions. You can find versions of this idea. I mean, admittedly, the ancient traditions didn't put it in terms of a computer because they didn't have computers. But look, for example, ancient Chinese philosophy, where the Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi put forward his parable of the butterfly dream, where he says, well, he just woke up from a dream where he was dreaming he was a butterfly, but now, am I Zhuangzi who dreamed he was a butterfly? Or am I a butterfly dreaming he's Zhuangzi? It's how do I know I'm not dreaming right now that I'm a Zhuangzi, that I'm Zhuangzi? That's a classic version, a classic analog of the simulation hypothesis. You also find this in René Descartes in his Meditations on First Philosophy, a work that some people see as the start of modern philosophy in the 17th century. Descartes said, how do you know your senses aren't fooling you right now? How do you know you're not dreaming right now? How do you know an evil demon isn't deceiving you by producing sensations of an external world? These are all versions of what philosophers call skeptical hypotheses, hypotheses where nothing is real that try to undercut your knowledge. Here's an illustration of this with the evil demon is messing with you by feeding you sensations. This is a high-tech evil demon. They get to use simulation technology. The evil demon is messing with you to produce experiences as of an external world around you. Descartes famously goes on to say, well, there's still something I know for sure. I am here thinking. I exist. He goes, I think, I'm thinking, therefore I am. I exist. So even while I'm doubtful about the external world, I can be sure that I exist. But Descartes at least thought, we had very serious reasons here to doubt the external world. By the way, these days you can ask these Cartesian questions, directly using the technology of simulation. We put those questions of Descartes by asking, how do you know you're not in a simulation? And in some ways, the issues here are like those for Descartes' hypotheses, but in some ways, they become more serious in the context of technology. It improves on the evil demon in at least one respect. That with the development of VR technology, it's actually now becoming a serious possibility that we have simulations like these. VR technology is really being developed. This will actually be possible before long. So it's no longer a mere science fiction possibility. It's becoming a serious possibility for technology in our world. You could actually take Descartes said, I couldn't really be fooled into thinking that I'm sitting by the fire with this paper in my hand. But yeah, for all Descartes knows, he might actually be in VR, which gives him an experience just like this. So VR, in a way, is making these old Cartesian problems even more serious by making them more realistic. Nick Bostrom has also put forward an argument that some of you may know that simulated worlds may turn out to greatly outnumber unsimulated worlds because simulation technology will be so widely used. Maybe it could be that most beings in the universe end up being simulated. And then you say, what are the odds that I'm unsimulated? Maybe it's more likely I'm in a simulation. Oh, here's an illustration of, Bertrand Russell said, ordinary reality is the simplest hypothesis, so maybe we should believe in that. And here I have Bostrom saying back, but there may actually be many more simulations, in which case we should expect simulation in a way to be the default hypothesis. All the more reason to take this seriously. So, Descartes used this as an argument that we can't know anything. We can't know, first premise, we can't know we're not in a simulation. Second premise, if we're in a simulation, nothing is real. Conclusion, we can't know anything is real. So I actually accept the first premise. I accept we can't know we're not in a simulation. That's I basically argued for that now. That was the first of my three main claims. I think we can't rule out that we're in a simulation. It's a serious possibility. Descartes used that in an argument like this to argue then that we can't know anything is real, because if we're in a simulation, nothing is real. That's the part that I want to resist. So here, the common view of simulations and of virtual reality is simulations are illusions. Virtual reality is illusory reality. And you remember, I want to resist this view. I think virtual reality is genuine reality. So although I agree with Descartes that we can't know we're not in a simulation, I totally reject the idea that simulations are illusions. So here's Cornel West, the American philosopher, expressing this idea. Cornel West himself acted in the sequels to The Matrix, playing Counselor West of Zion. Here we have him, he was in The Matrix, he escapes to Zion, then he escapes to the US. But Cornel West actually says in his commentary on the movie, it's illusions all the way down. This is a very, very common view. Everything in simulated reality is illusions, maybe in physical reality too. But it's a view I want to resist. My view is simulations need not be illusions. If we're in a perfect simulation, like The Matrix, the world around us is still perfectly real. It's a digital world, to be sure, but the objects are still real. There are still tables and chairs. There are still planets and people. In the Matrix, we have Neo saying, this isn't real. Morpheus comes back by saying, what is real? How do you define real? Morpheus here is, he's a paradigm philosopher. What even do you mean by real? Define your terms, please. How do you define real? How do you define real? Well, there's a lot of things you might mean with the word real, but here are at least, I think, three central things we care about when we say something is real. Something is real if it makes a difference, if it has causal powers in the world, it actually affects things. Something is real if it isn't all in the mind. If something is all in the mind, then often we treat it as less real. But if it's external to the mind, it's real. And third, something is real if it isn't an illusion. I got that back. Something is real if it isn't an illusion. If something is an illusion, then we say somehow it's not real.